Welcome to Lightning Ministries Day Devotional. Today's topic, rejoicing in sadness. I'm reading from Ezra chapter 3, verses 10 through 13. But I have a question for you. Have you ever waited a long time and then finally got something that you really wanted? That's a profound question. But maybe you waited for millenniums, decades, to see a close relative or friend or job or home or whatever. But perhaps you left your home country and you never expected to return back to it. That's the story of Ezra. But my thought for you is, how did you feel when you finally got what you wanted or finally came home after being gone for so long? Now, sometimes I find that in reality, at the end of a long period of expectancy in waiting, it's kind of a bittersweet feeling. But the story here is about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the exile for those that were in captivity to Babylon, or the Babylonians for that matter, and how traumatic it was. Now, what the Israelites had been waiting for was something that was over 70 years before any redemption, release, or chances to return were ever given back to them. Now, I realize here in Ezra 3, the time has finally come, and the Israelites have returned, and the temple foundation has been relaid, and the walls are starting to be rebuilt. But what was lost in that? For those that had been there previously and had lived through this, can they ever really imagine and even be able to celebrate in any kind of relief of what was once to what is now? You know, sometimes I realize that, well, let me say it another way. In our country right now, we're facing tremendous floods and tornadoes and high winds, even where I live, and lives were lost. I think even up to eight lives were lost in these winds that came through here. They were almost hurricane-type winds. And while trees were down and houses were damaged and lives were lost, the sadness that follows even the point of rebuilding, things are never going to be the same. We may think that they're better, but you and I, as being an older generation and have stood before and know what we've lost, makes it even harder. Even in this case, the Israelites had redemption. They were free and they were able to rebuild. But what would cause them to have joy? The joy of being able to resurrect what was torn down? Or the sadness that followed their lives for what was once before in their memories that could never be again? I realize that is a fleeting thing in our lives right now. Our lives are short, and we should have moments of rejoicing and even of sorrow, as it explains here in Ezekiel 3:4. But I realize that sometimes there's kind of an entanglement in the way that you and I can't really comprehend or even hope to even be able to separate that between good and bad, right and wrong, evil versus good. But I realize that the Lord doesn't ask us to do that. And for some ways, you know, it's like someone coming against you and you forgive them, but you don't forget. And in this particular case, the Babylonians had taken their livelihoods and their lives away from them. And then at some point, because of the walls that were torn down, they were given a chance to go back and rebuild. But you and I need to remain faithful in these moments. Why? Because thousands are beside us. And until the day when God does return, as it says in Revelations 21:4, that He will wipe away every tear. It doesn't take away the sadness or the memories of the loss. And while there's an assurance that God will give us the joy that we lack and the opportunities to feel comforted from the loss of those that have gone before us and the loss of those things around us for those of us that are struggling now, I ask you to search your hearts and look forward to the coming return of our King. But most of all, I encourage you to realize that even while there is sorrow in our world, there's also a time to rejoice. Lift up your voices and allow the Lord to receive the songs from your mouths and your voices, thanking Him that you're still here to even proclaim His name, not only from the rooftops, but to those around you. You know, it's hard sometimes to allow the Lord to speak to me and have me share with you what is on His heart, what's going on, with what is going on. But I encourage you with this: you're not alone, and God does love you. And while things may not seem the way you would like them to be, I would encourage you to thank Him for what you have, and thank Him from where you come from. And while you may not be exactly where you want to be right now, God does answer our prayers. And I don't always hear that word, well, maybe it's not His time, or maybe He's not going to answer that way. It's irrelevant to the fact that we have the opportunity to have a personal relationship to ask God regardless of how we ask. And if He wants to change our hearts and how we ask, then that's God's decision and His choice. But if we're not mindful of that, or even silent enough to hear Him, we're never going to know. Regardless, thanks for listening. I hope in some way I've encouraged you and reinstated that joy back into your heart from any sorrows or discomfort that you may be going through right now. Thanks so much for coming, and have a blessed day.